Good morning, day, evening, all. Welcome to another My Meditation Journey event. My name's Alexandria, and today's session is on awakening the next generation, connecting youth with meditation and meaning, with Erin Stryker, interviewed by our own Courtland Dahl. Before welcoming Court on to give a more thorough introduction, I'd like to go over the features that we're using today. This event is primarily taking place on YouTube. At the end of the hour, there will be some time for Q&A. To submit your questions, please use the link that is being shared on the YouTube chat now or on the QR code. Thank you, Kezia, for sharing the slide. We can leave that for, thank you. Yeah, so the link again is in the YouTube chat. And when submitting your questions, please do your best to keep them concise and on topic so that we can ask as many questions as possible. And don't worry about having to submit them in English. You can submit them in your own language, and our Google form will translate them. I'd like to now welcome on our friend and Tergar instructor, Courtland Dahl, to introduce our special guest. Welcome, Court. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much, Alexandria, and thank you everybody for joining. Thank you so much to our honored guest, Erin. So great to have you with us. We're really looking forward to this. So Erin is a really, really fascinating guy. He is the founder and the executive director of Dharma Gates. We're going to hear all about Dharma Gates in a few minutes, but it's really one of the premier organizations bringing meditation and the Buddhist approach to working with the mind and emotions to the younger generation. So, of course, that's the topic we're here to discuss today. So we'll hear a little bit about Erin's background, what led him to these practices and teachings, and how he's been working now for some time to help open up these teachings to a whole new generation. So, Erin, I hope you don't mind with just dropping straight into it. When we first got to know each other and when I learned about your story, I was struck by how similar it actually was to my own. I started meditating when I was in college, and it was a time where I was both intensely curious but completely overwhelmed. And I just knew I needed to make a change in my life. And it sounds like there was something very similar in your life. I'm kind of curious if you could take us back to that time. Was there a moment where it just clicked for you? Was it kind of a gradual realization that you just needed something different in your life? What actually got you started down this path that you've been on?
Well, yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me, Cortland, and the whole team here. It's really impressive how you guys are running and handling this, and beautiful offering. So I think I can see the seeds of the practice going back before I really had any conscious awareness of it, which mostly through athletics, actually through rowing. I was a competitive rower in high school, and I remember starting to have these kind of absorption experiences a little bit during, I don't know, I would just feel crazy, like high in a way after some of those events. And it stayed. It would last for like some days or hours afterward where I was like, I don't know if this is what everybody's having happen. And somehow it sort of led to, reading about spirituality. And when I got to college, I was reading a book called Light on Yoga by BKS Iyengar. And he had all these breathing techniques in the back of that book that he said, don't try these at home under any circumstances. And
The
so,
best
of course,
the best advertisement to
yep.
get somebody to say, tell them not to do it.
Yeah. So I was totally entranced and went and did a bunch of those sort of pranayama techniques from the yoga tradition, and found some way of manipulating the energy in my body that felt really good, and then that led to having a big energetic shift, which there's this frame that I don't think is really talked about that much in the Buddhist world, but this kind of Kundalini awakening phenomenon. I had that like very, very classic experience of that when I was 18, which sounds sexy, but it really was really terrifying. It was really, really kind of overwhelming. And
And did you have anybody in your life who could help you make sense of that, or was it just you and a couple books? I mean,
for
how
a
did
few
you deal with
months, it
that?
was me and books and like the internet, and I was having a lot of experiences that, it would be these waves of fear and terror and like the world talking to you, like just hard to describe. Like, I absolutely could have, without the right frameworks or resources, been in a mental hospital, some kind of medical system if I had like gone in a certain direction with this experience. But I had a kind of confidence that this was a spiritual experience and I was basically going to navigate it in that way because of reading these books. Um and yeah, then I kind of asked around. I mean, I told my parents, I think, and my dad had been practicing with a yoga teacher for some years who had been practicing in India and the kind of Ashtanga yoga tradition. And I went and met with her kind of as like a triage situation, like help. I'm like, don't know what to do. And she gave me a couple practices and then also just kind of told me like, okay, get off substances, like eat grounding food, the basic kind of hygiene, energetic hygiene to like stay stable. And I started trying to take that seriously, but I was kind of emerging from some years of, doing what a lot of young people do and like partying and so it was a big, like I had to make this shift or I was going to lose it, basically. It's what it felt like. It
And did
was
you have,
very,
I'm kind of curious,
yeah.
I mean, you talk about panic attacks. Obviously, this was an incredibly intense experience. Prior to this, were you doing well? I mean, did the panic and some of these things that you talk about in your own experience, was that happening prior to this, or was it really brought on by this?
I mean, the way I think about it now is I felt great before this. I was like, my life
So
is
it
great.
wasn't like you were in a mental health
No, I
crisis
wasn't
prior to
having,
this. It was like
I was,
it was actually brought on by the practices you
yeah,
were doing.
yeah, I was really like loving my life, felt like I was figuring out everything, like really excited to go to college and all of this. I wasn't a situation where I was having a lot of, I don't know how to just, anxiety beforehand, which maybe is rare. I think that's the case a lot of people are in, but for me, it was something shifted and I started having these spiritual experiences and it was like a lot of my like the kind of some part of the like ego structure we use to keep out the vulnerability of being alive was gone. And so suddenly I'm like really in the uncertainty, that kind of some of the experience of groundlessness, but without any frameworks, without any tools. And I was just the panic was this really started after that. I had, rounds of like fall semester freshman year, I had a number of panic attacks. I like called the ER a few times. Um, and I can't a couple more times throughout college. I got a little more grounded after I started doing yoga. I took time off, worked in
Was it a
landscape.
lot of like physiological stuff? I think for people who haven't had panic attacks, it sounds very psychological, and of course it
Mm.
is psychological and emotional, but a lot of it is very physical, like heart symptoms, palpitations,
Oh,
all
it
sorts
doesn't
of things
feel
that I
like a
think people don't
mind thing.
realize. It feels physical. I mean, it feels
Doesn't,
like you might
yeah.
actually be dying. Is that what you were experiencing?
It doesn't, your mind is so far behind your body in that situation. It's like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
body, like some cascade happens really quickly, and then the mind is like, oh, I'm dying. That's what's happening. And the body's already decided like 10 steps ahead of you. And so
yeah, yeah.
actually slowing down that process enough for the mind to start to like understand what's happening it took years. I mean, it took like 6, 7 years, like to like really kind of decouple that little, there's a little cascade that happens of, scary sensation, thought, I don't know, the whole chain, and
Yeah.
starting to really see it enough to not go into the spiral. It took a long time.
Uh, yeah, this is such an interesting journey. I mean, for me, it was almost like the inverse. I mean,
Mm.
similarly challenging circumstances, but I think like a lot of people in the past, and probably even more so now with the rates of mental health challenges that people are experiencing, especially the younger generations. For me, it was what led me to that interest was the overwhelm and
Mm,
social anxiety in particular. I always like to joke that it's like the huge irony of my life that I do stuff like this because public speaking, I had
mm,
a complete and total phobia of public speaking. I mean, it so freaked me out. And being in the situation where I had to do this in college, where you're just having to get up in front of a group of people and talk, that was just way more than I could handle. So for me, a lot of the early experiences of meditation were just kind of grappling with my own racing mind,
mm.
intense emotions, and the spiritual experience as part of it unfolded very slowly. You almost like got dropped straight into very intense spiritual experiences and had to find the grounding within that to kind of deal with what you were experiencing. So did you sort of back up in your journey? I mean, you started with doing pranayama, which for those of you listening who don't know, I mean, these are oftentimes quite intense breathing exercises that you find in many meditative traditions, the yogic traditions like Hatha yoga and Ashtanga yoga. Um, Buddhist traditions have them as well, but they're very intense and they can they bring a lot up. So I'm curious, did you kind of back up in your practice and go to much more basic, like mindful breathing, mindfulness of the body, just to sort of, I mean, you were
Yeah,
doing very
I mean,
intense things. How did that play out for you?
yeah, many things happened, like since then that so really Ashtanga yoga was the first method that I was doing, which I did for really 6 years. But the first, I didn't really encounter Dharma Buddhism until a couple years later. So, I took the next year off of school. I was doing Ashtanga like 6 days a week in the formal
And
kind of,
Ashtanga is like a kind of a
um,
flowing, a
it's
very
a
active,
very
you're moving
active,
through these postures,
yeah,
right?
very down regulating, but kind of integrating, healing practice if it's done well. And I mean, perfect. It was the perfect medicine for me at that time, in terms of
It
just
just
like
brought you into your body. Is it
getting,
because it
yeah,
was
getting
bringing you
into the
this?
body and helping all the kind of erratic energies that kind of had been opened, like moving, getting everything settled to move more smoothly and integrated. And I was working in landscaping, so that was also really good. Like just
Yeah.
deeply ground for.
Yeah. It's amazing how healing just being connecting to the body, connecting to the earth. It's amazing how many problems that simple thing solves,
Yeah.
and how many things in our life pull us in the opposite direction.
Yeah. Um, and I went to India and did a sort of formal 6 week period at the Mysore program, like, the main institute for Mysore style Ashtanga, which is in Mysore. And um, that was the first time where I was like, oh, okay, my life is going to be basically about this spirituality thing. Like, like this is what I'm doing. Um, and um, then
Were you still doing sitting meditation at this time too,
I
or
really
did it
wasn't
become
doing
mostly
sitting.
about
I really
yoga?
didn't discover seated meditation really until I learned TM when I was in India and I was doing it here and there, but it never totally clicked with me. But
Yeah, TM is transcendental. It's like a mantra-based meditation for those of you who aren't familiar with it. But yeah, please go on in.
um but it so kind of the deep origin story, I guess, of Dharma Gates too is this like a few years that happened when I was, from my sophomore year of college. I came back to campus after my gap year. I was like, had a horrible culture shock. It was really hard. I had all the panic came back. All my coping mechanisms came back. Because the academic environment is really pressure cooker and in some ways really not a healthy place to be in for a lot of people in my view right now. And um, so I met somebody on campus who had spent 3 months at a Zen monastery in the Catskills, and we kind of connected, although I had no idea about this Buddhism thing. But he seemed like he had really, I don't know, there was something about him. I was like, it seems like it worked a little bit. And started organizing, he and a couple other people started organizing these trips up to the Daibasatsu Zendo in the Catskills for their Intro to Zen program. And these are just a Friday through Sunday trip, but groups of students from Wesleyan and started going up. So I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and so we started kind of organizing these groups of students to go up, which was funded by the university actually. And we'd have like 15. The biggest one was like 25 people for a weekend.
It's
And
so
it's
cool that the
so powerful.
university was actively supporting it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, they gave us a good amount of funding to like make all this happen, do the carpools and everything, and that really created the momentum on campus to create this student community, this student group West Sangha kind of formed out of those trips, which is
Mm.
still going. It's been like 7 or 8 years now. But but when I got to Daibosatsu Zendo, I was like, it was a revelation to me that there were people in the US practicing like so diligently, and that I didn't have to go to India to like find like real spirituality, and the kind of differences between the practice I had experience with and the Zen tradition was very confusing to me, but the practice worked. Like
And
I started
what was,
finding
I mean, how did you, like, how did that feel at the time? What practices did you start doing at the Zen Center? And then how did you, like, what was the confusion like for you? How
Oh,
did
I
you
mean, they just
work
gave
with that?
me the breath counting, count your breath 1 to 10,
Hmm.
and like focus on the hara, on the lower belly, and that was really extremely powerful. In some ways, I wish I'd had more guidance. I kind of just took it and ran with it and did it like couple hours, like a lot, through the rest of
You're clearly a
college.
pretty intense guy, Aaron, I must say.
Yeah,
Everything you did very intensely.
it's true. It's true. But I there I think it may have been good if I had brought into my scope a little bit and also included some heart practices and some other things. It was just really discovered concentration. And that was, I was pretty hooked.
And take me
Um,
back to the first times where you were started to do these forms of sitting meditation. Do you remember what that was like? I mean,
yeah.
was your mind kind of naturally settled, or were you dealing with the racing thoughts that most people contend with?
I seem to be a relatively rare case. I don't want to like I don't know. Like many people have many different kinds of experiences when they start to sit and they're all great. But I had a lot of it was very, very pleasant right from the beginning. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, this is amazing. Which then it's gotten harder over time, actually. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think the deep patterns like took a long time to emerge, like more time to emerge. But my initial experiences were just this is the best thing ever. And so, and I had a few other friends who were also really into it. We used to like, we would joke, we would like kind of pregame. There's this pre-gaming when you like go drink
Yeah, yeah.
alcohol before going to a party. We would do that with meditation and go sit for 2 hours and then go to a party and be like, it was a really strange college experience, and um, in that way. But yeah, I think. It started to develop slowly. I started going to Zen centers during my breaks, and I started getting a little bit more guidance, especially between my junior and senior year. I went to a Korean temple in my hometown in Michigan for a month, and then Great Vow Zen Monastery in Oregon for about 5 weeks, had my first week-long retreat, and I really started to get more guidance and, uh, you know, I think learn how to concentrate in a little bit of a more relaxed way, which was healthier, and I think let more of the like heart material start to come up and a little more like integrated approach. And um yeah, so it took a while, I think, for I was still having anxiety and stuff even when I was sitting that much, and I was still having a lot of it was really turbulent all through college. I mean, it
Sounds like
wasn't.
it was more turbulent when I mean, it sounds like during the meditation, or at least the beginning, like you kind of went deep pretty fast. But at a
Mm.
certain point, a lot of stuff coming up. Was that more coming up when you were practicing, or was more just like all of processing the rest of your life outside of the meditation?
I mean, I think it's just my mind has some natural, like pretty concentration comes like relatively naturally to me, but that doesn't mean that you've like cleaned up all of the other stuff. And so I think I could concentrate, but I didn't really know how to reconcile those experiences with all the other parts of me that needed attention. And there was a lot
Mm.
that needed attention that I don't think I really wanted to, knew how to like really feel and like honor a lot of like my kind of core relational wounding and insecurity and all of this that was just like in some ways like running the show in college, like, and I think that's true in a lot of, for a lot of people. But I had this sort of like refuge in these practices during that time, which gave a kind of baseline security and stability, but also all that other stuff was still there, like it wasn't, I was, it's in some ways like, yeah, I think, I don't know, could have been smoother how I learned, how my intro to the practice, I think would have been good if I had a teacher more like
So
stable.
was it a conscious part of your practice at the time that you were learning how to deal with all of the emotional stuff was going on, or was it just kind of like this other part of your life that hadn't quite kind of connected up with whatever was happening in your meditation practice?
I thought I was dealing with it. And I think Ashtanga does. Like the yoga somehow does have this effect of working through and like working through emotional material. But um I kind of like had this idea that if I just concentrate on my belly enough that all my problems will go away. And that isn't really how it
Yeah,
works. Like it's
yeah,
I've
yeah,
learned since then that that's not actually what the Buddha taught.
yeah.
So uh
It's interesting though that I mean that your experience with yoga. I also so I started meditating in 1993 when I was a college student, as I said, and I similarly had an intuition. I mean, I started my first entry point was sitting meditation, and but I was doing exactly what you're doing. I was doing mainly breath, counting the breath,
mm,
also a little bit of that same like bodily awareness in the hara, like which is this point right below the navel, but mostly breath awareness for me. But I also really wanted to do something physical. I think intuitively, I just knew I had a lot of energy. I was always like the can't sit still, kid, really always active. And I was always getting in trouble when I was a little kid, running around the classroom, that kind of kid. So I intuitively knew I needed some kind of physical outlet. And I remember at the time I looked at different things. I was very attracted to Aikido, which
mm,
is, a Japanese martial art, primarily because I love the philosophy. Kind of, I love just sort of the ideas behind it. But there wasn't that much in Minneapolis where I grew up at the time. There was something, but it was not convenient for me. So I started doing yoga at the same time. So I started doing yoga and meditation together. And like you did, just bringing awareness into the body and doing these yoga poses that just forced my awareness down into my body. That was so healing.
mm.
And having it as part of the practice was really helpful. So interesting that you kind of maybe did the ordering a little differently. So at the other thing I wanted to ask about this, because it was something that I think a lot of us can easily miss, is the social part. Um, a lot of people don't know other people who are meditating. They might get into meditation or get an interest in these things, and you have your social group that might just be totally different. That was definitely the case for me. Like I didn't know anybody who was meditating. One of my good friends like said I was joining a cult. I didn't even have any friends. So I'm like, I can't be in a cult by myself. Like I literally don't know anybody. So how could it be a cult? But I'm curious, it sounds like in your case, you actually had friends and this whole group of people. How was that? Just having a little tribe accompany you on the journey. Was that a big part of it for you? Or, I mean, so much of your life has been about community, like creating community and group experiences. How did that shape your early experience?
I mean, just so much. I think there really it was just three or four of us at Wesleyan who were really, really into this meditation and Zen and but we had a little thing like we would all meet in the meditation the chapel. We had a little space there like every day-ish, and we would be sitting for a while. It wasn't just like 20-minute sit. We would be like, okay, let's do 2 hours. Like and so having that kind of little, I mean, one of my good friends from that time is one of Dharma Gates co-founders, Nikki, like is ordained and now he's in Malaysia training, and it was a very deep, long-term friendship there, and um, it 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 kind of showed me that, and also these trips to Daibasatu Zendo, we would take these groups up, and not everybody from those trips would stay very interested in Dharma or meditation, but some would, and then this kind of student community, West Sangha, did form, and there was a lot of, you know, 10, 15 people would come, sometimes 20 people, these things. And then also we'd go to these Intro to Zen weekends, and there's other universities who'd be there, and there's also some people interested in Dharma from other schools, and that was super fun to meet people and have this kind of shared interest. And that kind of was the seed of Dharma Gates, of really seeing like there's something really powerful and important that happens when you have Sangha in that way, and a lot of young people don't. And you know, in some ways, that little group of 4 people like kept me sane at Wesleyan for 2 years while I was there.
Mm.
And partly the whole kind of origin point of Dharma Gates was just me being like, I want more friends. Like, and and also I know, like, if you think of every university, even if it's a small school, like a couple thousand people, they might only have like 3 people who are super into meditation. But if they kind of connect to one another, then suddenly a community forms. And or if they connect to the other schools in the area, then you have an actual community. And then there's so much more like peer support for practice. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to overstate. It's super hard to do alone, especially when you're just getting started and you're not like, you haven't spent time in monasteries or something to have this kind of deep stability. Like there's this really strong, especially I think when you're young, tendency to want to conform, want to be cool, like want to be like
Yeah, you
appreciated
don't
and
want to be
have
doing,
friends, fit
yeah,
in,
what
and like
everybody
be
else is
doing what
doing.
everybody's doing. And so starting to, like, for me, a lot of the tension at first was like not doing substances. I really had to be really strict with myself about not doing substances because of the effect on my mind. Like the way I was sensitive at that time, it was just a like strong no. Like I cannot touch anything
Yeah. Yeah,
basically.
that was another thing we share. I had a similar experience when I was 19, and like you, I had kind of hard charging kind of
Yeah.
childhood, a lot of partying through junior
Mm,
high and high school. It started quite early. And when I was 19, I'm just like, I can't, this is just not the way I want to live. And so
yeah.
I made a decision at that time, which is ironic because I wasn't even legally able to drink yet, but I stopped, and that was a huge part. It was, in a way, it was interesting because I didn't realize until I stopped all the substances. I didn't realize how much I had been relying on them to cope. And in
Mm,
particular, social, for me, social anxiety kind of went through the roof, and it was quite painful because I suddenly didn't have this thing that I had been masking all of that with. I didn't even realize I had been masking it. But as soon as I didn't have that, and although that was painful, it was such a blessing in my life because it just forced me to just confront my own mind and emotions. And I had these powerful tools with, yoga and meditation and all of that together. Although it wasn't easy, it was somehow a magically transformative process. So, but the social part of that is so huge. I think we
mm.
discount how critically important it is actually.
Yes, interesting. Actually, if I reflect on that time, like in a way, one of the most powerful things about having community of practice when you're young is like you have an alternative to like mainstream forms of peer pressure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and to me, like that was maybe the hardest transition, was transitioning because all of my friends at first were like partied and were doing substances, and me being like, yeah, I'm not going to smoke weed or drink, it's like a pretty big thing. Like it was not like a
My
small
friends
one.
were really freaked
Like,
out when I kind of stopped doing
yeah.
all that stuff. They were like, "What? Like never? Like what they it's like you just cannot compute, they
Yeah,
just did not understand."
and it kind of like removed me from a lot of environments like that. My whole friend network was, this is what they were doing together. And so, um, if I'm not doing this, it's kind of, in a way, it moved me into a whole new social space. And for a while it was like kind of alone. you know it
Yeah.
was me building my own social space, me being like, okay, I'm going to be alone meditating until I find people who, because it felt like the option to me. It wasn't like, oh, I can keep doing this and I kind of tried a little bit to like overwrite my body's the feedback I was receiving from my body, but it was too strong. I mean, I'd have like horrible like feeling like I was being possessed by demons basically as soon as I like had weed or alcohol. I was like, this is it, I can't.
Oh,
I can't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've like I'm by nature very introverted. I like to spend time alone. And all my early years meditating, it was like me and a pile of books. In part, just it wasn't nearly as common as it is now. And I don't think I realized how much I needed it at the time
Mm.
until I experienced it. And I've had so many conversations with people over the years that confirms that. And Tim Olmsted, who's one of the instructors in the Tergar community, really close friend and really, really wise individual. He likes to say something like, people come for meditation, but they stay for the community.
Mm.
People don't like very few people are like, oh, I want community or I want these, I want to, people who I can talk to about these things that I'm finding more meaningful. But when you experience it, it becomes so central. And another little anecdote that confirms that is that more from the scientific realm, there's a really brilliant scientist named Tanya Singer in Germany at the Max Planck Institute, one of the really leading neuroscientists on the planet, specifically in what's known as social neuroscience. She's done all this research and she's done a lot of research on meditation. And she had this really brilliant paradigm that they created called the Resource Project. It's very complex. People can look it up if they're interested. But one of the things that included was dyadic practice, meaning like pair practice, like you're paired up with another person and you have this kind of meditative process. Basically, you just kind of talk about what's coming up in your meditation. And I was asking her about this one time, and she told me that people never wanted to do it at the beginning. Like when they learned that this was part of the experiment, because these are big, rigorous scientific experiments, sometimes with hundreds of people. She said usually people wouldn't want to do it and they'd be a little resistant. But after the experiment ended, it was always their favorite part, and the part that oftentimes people were asking, like, can we somehow keep doing this? Like they wanted to keep going with it. And that to me, it really indicates something really common, which I think we have this need, but it's not really conscious. But as soon as it starts to get met, you're like, wow, that like that becomes as big a part of the practice as, sitting on the cushion and doing your daily
Totally.
practice and other things. So in a way, that's what you've been doing. Maybe we could turn our conversation to Dharma Gates because you basically created an organization and a community that's giving that to people. It's giving people both the practice opportunity for young people, and it's also opening the door to spiritual community where people like you had, like, can start meeting other people and talking to other people. So when did that become a thing? Because it sounds like you actually started this when you were still in college. You had this,
Yeah.
so how did that happen?
So it was between my junior and senior year. I think I mentioned already, I went to, spent the summer basically in two different Zen communities. And second one was Great Bout Zen Monastery in Oregon, which is still like one of my, I love that place, even though I haven't spent that much time there. And some of the teachers there had a huge impact on me. And y- I they have a summer program basically, which I think just a little off topic, but I think other Dharma places, if they're interested in outreach to young people, should study their summer program because they do a great job with
Mm.
reaching out to young people, getting people there, and kind of providing a pretty immersive, pretty intensive experience that's just blew me away. Like totally. It was my first experience of retreat, and there were multiple retreats there, and there was also other young people there, and it was just, my work practice was like picking blackberries in the field for 5 hours, and it was just like, and then sitting two
Amazing.
three
Huh.
hours a day, and it was, huge for me. And I think I had the idea when I was there of like basically, I took a gap year, as I mentioned, and I knew that there were these gap year programs that you could pay an organization $10,000 to take you to Thailand for 3 months. And I was like, you could go to Great Vow for 3 months for no money. And from a lot of people, I think you'd have a more important experience at Great Vow than you would in Thailand. Um, and so that was the sort of basic thought that became this idea create an organization to connect young people to Zen monasteries initially, kind of a gap semester program, but then that was kind of more than we could chew. It was a big thing. And so it became a little more simple. So I came back to campus and there was a startup incubator course through the Entrepreneurship Center at Wesleyan. And I was like, I had this idea. It's a cool opportunity. Let's just do this course and see what happens. And the course was good. And, we made a business plan. We did all this stuff. But really, there was one mentor there, Michaela Kingsley, who we had the opportunity to meet with her every week for office hours. And so I went in regularly and she always pushed me to take it more seriously than I was going to
Really?
take it. Really, Dharma Gates wouldn't have happened without her.
So at the beginning, it was kind of like you weren't necessarily really going to do it, and she pushed you
No, it was
like you
it
should
was
actually do this.
yeah, it was a cool idea. I was like, this is interesting. Also, there was a Wes alum named Miles Bouquet, who's on our board now, also one of the founders, who spent a lot of time after college practicing, a student of B. Alan Wallace, did a lot of practice. And I called him up too and was like, what do you think of this idea? And so we started talking about it, started working on it with the Entrepreneurship Center at Wesleyan. And the feedback I was getting from everybody was like, this is a really good idea. You should really do this. And I didn't really expect it necessarily to go how it did, but at the end of the semester, Michaela basically forced me to go to this pitch competition. I was gonna leave it. I was like, okay, that was cool. But she essentially, within the bounds of professional appropriateness, she forced me to go. Um, and
Good
and I
teacher.
did.
Who's like your
And yeah,
business guru.
yeah, totally. And pitched the Dharma Gates in front of some Connecticut businessmen who didn't know anything about Dharma and got best executive summary or something. And just the fact that these guys thought this was a reasonable enough a good enough idea to give some money to was, I don't know, after that I was like, okay, I should take this seriously. I should really. Um so we started doing some trial programs. A lot of our early retreats were facilitated by Miles, who I mentioned, who, is a younger person, kind of this combination of, we did a lot of relational practices, like you mentioned, early on, and then a lot of just classical mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the body. And Miles, I reached out to all these different student meditation communities that I found on Facebook and online, and we invited everybody to this retreat at Daibasatsu Zendo, which they agreed to host us for a week-long thing. We had no money. We gave them $100 a person for a week. It was ridiculous.
That's crazy. Wow.
But they were like, sure, you can, we'll work with you on this. And um, so we did it and it went amazing. I mean, it was, we had no idea what we were doing, but it went really well. And from there, Miles got invited to visit a bunch of different campuses to do more programs. We got a couple grants, one from Wesleyan and one from the Kensei Foundation. And so I graduated and we had some money and we had programs that we'd done. And I was like, well, this is my job now, I guess, because I'm kind of the person. So um, that was kind of how it got started logistically. And the core, I think the core orientation that I've really had since the beginning is look, I'm a young person, I'm a practitioner, I'm not a teacher, I'm not trying to, if we can make an organization that's providing a safe place for people to land and then really effectively redirecting people outwards towards the good centers that are out there, there's lots of good communities, there's lots of teachers, there's lots of, you know, senior practitioners now in the US and abroad, if people want to go abroad, that um, where you can go as deep as you want and there's resources and supports there. And so one of our advisors, Guogu, uh, said it we want to be a clearinghouse. He kept using that word, which I think is a good word. It's okay, where can people land, meet community, kind of meet teachers, meet the supports, and have the conversations and the kind of the points of contact that are going to help them figure out what the Dharma is in their life. And then based on that, be really deeply informed about how they want to proceed. And we don't, Dharma Gates doesn't want to actually answer that for anybody. I think there's something very mysterious that happens in any individual's karma, what things wake up that decides how deep you want to go in the practice and which lineage or teachers really speak to you. Like that's something we can't do. But we can kind of create the conditions for people to have that first encounter. Like I think I had a couple encounters where I was actually meeting, I think my first teacher, Angela, the Ashtanga teacher, and then also, Shinge Roshi, the abbot at Daibosatsu Zendo. And both of those times I was like, oh, there's something possible here that I didn't really know was possible. And just that when you're like at that age, you have so much energy that you can give to whatever you care about. Like you're like, I'm gonna build my life. Like, you're like a diesel engine, like train that's like, if I choose a goal, that's what I'm gonna do. I have 50 years to do it. So it's a powerful moment to meet someone like that and have the ability to make that choice if you want to. Where like I think a lot of people, if you're later in life, you don't have quite the same flexibility to say like, yeah, that takes 20 years to make that happen. I'm gonna do it. Right? Like,
Yeah, there's something in the Tibetan tradition. There's this idea of the bardo, and it's
mm,
basically just means a transition, which could be very short, but it could be a period in life. And I think this is an example. There's like this, it's just a transition period, and there's an openness and an energy that exists in these points of transition. Even we normally see the pain of them because usually there's some letting go and some process of opening up to something new that hasn't happened. And it always sounds good in theory that that happens, but when you're in the middle of that kind of stuff, it actually is oftentimes quite painful, right? Like it's,
mm,
sounds good when somebody else writes about it, but yet it's incredibly potent as a moment,
mm,
so that's maybe the one of the best periods of transition, the mixture of like the age, the energy that people have, the fact that you're kind of you're sort of figuring out who you are in the world at that point, and all these things coincide in that moment. What do you
totally.
think that for people who might watch this, who might be at that point, and maybe it's not that transition, they might be at another life transition, but especially people who are younger and they're like, okay, like I'm interested in this, but where do I like how do I get started? Because some of the impediments are money, time, social situation, like a lot of the things we talked about, there's a lot of barriers. There's an openness, but there's also a lot of barriers that exist.
Um,
So you've worked with now, I think like more than 1,500 people who have come to the retreats, and you've, I'm sure, gotten to know many of those people. What do you think is most helpful for people who are just opening up into this world and wondering where to go and what to do?
I think there's kind of I could think of like two real approaches that just came to mind, and one of them is, if you're in the kind of if you have the life circumstances and the flexibility, and if you're not working with like very pretty serious mental health issues, which that deserves its own kind of attention, and just going to a monastery is not the best thing necessarily for that in that case. But if you're in this exploring phase and you have some flexibility, like just go somewhere, like go to a monastery for a bit. And we have a lot of recommendations of places that we know are good. And
So
even if
you
it's
guys, I
not,
mean, so Dharma Gates actually can
yeah,
recommend
we
like, hey,
do.
here are what
We
are the
do.
options
Yeah.
are, and okay, that's great.
Yeah, it's one of the things that there's nuance to how do we do that well, but it's one of the things we want to do. And so I think that's one approach, because just going and having that experience will inform your whole perspective in life, and you'll have a much more like real embodied sense of what this whole
Mm.
Buddhism thing is actually about. And it might not be the right place. Also being super open to it, viewing it as a step, not a answer, right? Like you might go to a monastery for a month and have a really powerful experience and never go back, and that's fine.
Mm.
Um, and that there's a kind of deepening and clarification that will just happen over time by continuing to engage and ask the question. And but I think the other thing is, I think of like I've been thinking a lot about this in my own life, where we can approach our path like very conceptually, like we have this idea of what we think is good for us, and like how do we make our life conform to what is good for us. And sometimes I think we're already in our own unique combination of karma in our own life, and we have people and mentors around and good things around that we do care about, and we're already have a connection to. And it can be a matter of like prioritizing the things in our life that are good influences and that we do have a connection to, and letting go of the things that aren't helpful and we don't really need. And we're already embedded in that ecosystem, right? Everybody has supports and hindrances already. And so it's really, I think in some ways, um, if you have teachers or community you're already drawn to, you're already interested in practices, you're already curious about, like going, leaning in the direction of what's alive, I think is a really good principle. I think actually a very dangerous way to move through the world is to just, like a lot of young people I think now are, and there's reason for it, to be like orienting by fear, by you're afraid of what will happen if you don't get the right job or you don't do the right thing, you don't have the right thing lined up. But I think if you're living from fear as your main motivator, you're not listening to the, like, some deeper data there that's really is there for everyone, I think, of what's actually alive. Where does your care and energy want to go in the world if you get the fear out of the way?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in myself, seeing that when you feed and are in touch with the thing that actually cares and like is aligned with your basic integrity and like desire for goodness, which I think everybody has, it tends to grow and it tends to self, like clarify and gradually lead towards better and better things, and doors open that way that you know it might just lead towards the Dharma community, or the community that you really want to be involved with, as opposed to yeah, I think there's also a danger of the kind of just conceptual view of, this is, I want to be a Buddhist, quote unquote. I'm going to choose a monastery at random and go there. It doesn't really necessarily always work. So I think both of those can be powerful, like just following what's really alive. Right.
Yeah, it's something I don't hear much discussion about, but hearing you say that, it rings so true for me. And I certainly remember many times in my life, especially when I was at the earlier stages of my path, where there was some kind of intuitive pull towards something. And sometimes doors were kind of opening, but oftentimes it kind of didn't make sense on a more like,
Totally.
does
Mm,
this, oh yeah, there was something else that it was more, sometimes it was very fear-based. Sometimes it was just this feeling of like, well, I should do that, but like
mm,
according to who and what. And it was like my heart was just very clearly pulling me in one direction, and there was this voice of like should on the other side. And I remember it being very challenging, like discerning where to follow, but seeing that the more you follow that heart energy and kind of where just things are just feel opening and like you said alive, it just kind of something speaks to you. You don't know why, but a door opens and you don't know where it's going to lead necessarily. It might make no sense and like this is your career journey or something. But I found like just trusting that. And there's always a fear response to that. Like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, is this going to be, are you putting yourself at risk in some way? But it was almost always when I did that more amazing than I could have imagined if I had tried to like script it all out and had some big strategic plan for my life. So it seems like you're speaking to that really, really beautifully. I'm curious, what do you another interesting thing is just the in addition just to the normal life transition that people are at that stage of life, we're also just in a world that is just dialing up the normal anxieties and things that humans are already dealing with, you know, exponentially. What do you think from the more community point of view? A lot of times meditation communities skew quite older, and I know like when I walked in the door, and I can see this experience from many other people, you walk in the door, and if you're not in that generation, you just feel like, okay, this isn't for me. Like this is just people of a different generation, or it could be different in many ways. But I mean, how can we create opportunities and space that are going to feel more kind of more open to that, to this generation?
apologies
Looks
for
like
my really quick.
you're in a Bardo
A lot
period.
of children just came in, and I'm in a public library, so I'm gonna move to the other room.
Nice. Okay. Well, we'll accompany you through this Bardo period. So
Yep.
yeah, I'm curious what you would say. Good auspicious occurrence with a bunch of kids coming in. So what is it, do you think people are really looking, not, I mean, of course, we're looking for on a deeper level, but what are the circumstances, I guess you could say, that people are looking for that are going to make it feel like, oh yeah, there's something here for me beyond the deeper sense, of course, around meditation and whatnot.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think my sense is a lot of there's an initial period before a lot of young people when I think of my going to this summer program at Great Vow in 2017. um I think a lot of young people are in a state of just basically overwhelmed with
Yeah.
life and with all the information and all of the different streams of basically people telling you what you should do, and knowing, like an inner knowing, that basically they're all wrong. Like almost all of the influences that are coming in are in some way like nuanced, have an agenda, or they're untrustworthy in some way. And I think a lot of young people right now feel that this sort of basic like lack of trust in traditional paths set forward for us, and also lack of trust in a lot of mainstream institutions, and not really knowing like, okay, what do I orient towards then?
Hmm.
And just the constant chronic overwhelm of information. And so for me, there was a period of just, my gap year where I was just doing nothing, and landscaping was amazing for just clearing out the system and seeing what's actually there if I stop putting other stuff in.
Hmm.
And similarly, I think going to a monastery for a while where you can just do nothing. Like, don't you don't have to solve that problem right away.
Just
You
take
don't have
away
to,
the inputs and then
yeah.
just create
Mhm.
space.
Just
What's
create
what,
some
what's a, what's
space.
a what's a non-monastic version of that? I mean, some people will have the circumstances to do that. For people who aren't ready for like a
Totally.
such a dramatic step, what's like the non, is there a version of that you can do within your life that's like, because I love that
Absolutely.
principle of
Yeah.
like, let's just don't worry about what you put in. It's more like just opening space. What would that look like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it comes back to this, what we were talking about before of, I really think everybody, if you clear out space, if you down regulate, there's different ways of saying this. If you relax um deeply enough, then there's people want to do things. People have care. People have interest, energy. They generally, I think human beings have a natural love for life, for things, for the world that just comes when you aren't interfering with it. When you're not like, overwhelmed and stressed and putting all this stuff on it, there are things that you're interested in.
Hmm.
And so many young people aren't in touch with that. And in themselves, they haven't like found the space that is just naturally fulfilling to be moving from and living from. And so then there's this thing of like, how do I build a life that's meaningful in the face of the world right now when everything feels meaningless and useless? Um, and there's not an answer to that that's conceptual. There's no there's no correct arrangement of
There's no
logic that's
rule
going to
book
solve
for
that
what
for you.
how that
Yeah.
happens.
You have to get rid of enough of the pressure, the stress that's in the way to find in some way like the embodied answer to the question, which is really, I think, the answer to the question of like, what do you care about deep down? Like that it'll be worth doing whether or not it works. Like you can spend your whole life trying to save the Amazon and it might not work, but like maybe that's still it's still the right thing. It's still what your body's like asking you to do. Or maybe it's be a monk, or like, I don't think there's a right. I don't think I have a particular uh sense of people needing to be taking a path of service or a path of just renunciation. I think someone's own kind of calling will answer that for them, but kind of inviting people into being like really listening to their
Hmm.
own process. And that's not something that is not really dependent on being in a monastery or not. It's like trusting that beneath all of the layers of BS that we're consuming, that there's some kind of natural guidance system in us that knows, who we really are and how we want to be in the world. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Aaron. I've been looking at the questions coming in from those watching, and I think actually we've covered a lot of those. I was kind of watching them and saying, okay, but actually I think we've hit a lot of these key points. And that last, the sentiment you just shared, such a beautiful note to end on. So why don't I think we can maybe wrap it up here, and just to thank you, Aaron, for everything you shared today, for the work you're doing in the world. I'm sure I speak for everybody who is watching this and will watch this, that this is incredibly inspiring, and especially what you just shared about how you kind of get in touch with that voice and just kind of see what unfolds in a in a very open, unscripted way. I'm sure will resonate with people. So yeah, so thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for hosting in the podcast. And apologies for that. There's some massive event starting
No,
here,
it
which
was great. No, it was somehow very fitting with what we're talking about. We're like, how can we create space for more young people to come into this world? And a bunch of young people came into this
yeah,
world
there's
as
like
we were talking
50
about that.
children
So
who just entered the
no, it was great. It was great. No problem at all. Thank you. And I think Alexandria is gonna pop on to lead us out.
Yeah, and I have to say, I agree. I think it was very auspicious that a bunch of kids came in. Really, yeah, very beautiful. And just to continue the thank yous from court. Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron, for being here with us. That was a really wonderful, fun, warm, and just insightful conversation between you and court. And it was a joy to listen to. And just on our side, it was really amazing to listen to your journey, Aaron, and to hear your heart reflections that has led to such meaningful work from such a young age. And it was, delightful, being the MC for this event, because similar to you in court, I met the Dharma formally in college. But I will say, unlike you in court, I was alone in my journey, but I would meet with a dear sorority sister who was open to Buddhism, and we would get margaritas after my Dharma classes to talk. And now she does Joy of Living, so she stayed with it. And but I was really amazed to hear, wow, what inner discipline and just commitment from such a young age from you both. So just incredible. Before we have our final goodbyes, we have some slides we like to share with our wonderful online audience. Thank you, Kezia. Yeah, just to continue, as Court and as Aaron has shared, Aaron has made a lot of efforts in connecting others to meditation. And obviously, Tergar is another route in which one can benefit from these ancient wisdoms, but where Mingyur Rinpoche has packaged it for our modern busy times. So if you're new to meditation, or even if you've been practicing for some time, but you want to deepen your practice, then the Joy of Living program is a wonderful place to start. These teachings offer a structured and authentic path designed by Mingyur Rinpoche, guiding you from the basics of awareness to the profound insight into the nature of reality. Under the expert guidance of Rinpoche and the Tergar instructors, the Joy of Living contains 3 levels of teachings and methods to uncover and get in touch with our inherent awareness, compassion, and wisdom. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So we can just take a moment, and I'll just read this quote from Evan, a Joy of Living student. These meditations have really been beneficial in my ability to express love towards others, even in small ways. As I've opened up more, my ability to be happy for others or grateful for others' freedom from suffering is slowly shifting my own worldview. And again, all along the way, thank you so much. Yeah, this beautiful slide that shows some of our wonderful instructors right here. An additional unique benefit of being a Joy of Living subscriber is the ability to schedule one-on-one meetings with Tergar guides for expert guidance to answer your questions. And finally, last year, we started the Community Circle live sessions. So you can stay on that last slide, Kezia. Thank you. the community circle live sessions led by Tergar instructor Tim Olmsted, who Cortland mentioned. Tim is an incredible human and spent many, many years living alongside Mingyur Rinpoche's father, Togo Organ Rinpoche, a master in the Dzogchen lineage, and has a very beautiful presence and unique teaching, not only through the traditional teachings, but through the stories of his time with Togo Organ and other great masters. So these are really sweet sessions with Tim. And these meetings aim to provide open and relaxed environments where participants can share their experiences and gain insights from Tim's expert guidance and from one another. Now we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Kezia. And please feel free to try a free 10-day trial at joy.tergar.org. And always know you can reach out to Tergar if you need any financial support. Tergar is in a place where we can support you with that. So we do invite you to visit joy.tergar.org to learn more and to begin your meditation journey with Mingyur Rinpoche, Tergar guides, and our wonderful international community. Thank you so much, Kezia, for sharing those slides. And yes, now we'll say our final goodbyes. And I'd like to say again, thank you so much, Court, and thank you, Aaron, for being here with us. I think Aaron's in the middle of a retreat right now. So thank you for making the time. And Court, thank you for also joining us from your cabin, both of you guys in retreats of your own. And I'd like to say thank you to my wonderful team, Eduardo, Kezia, and Daniel. They're the ones who really made this possible. And of course, thank you to our incredible participants, our audience. There'd be no reason to show up without you guys. So that will do it for today. And I apologize for any shaking of my camera. My sweet dog Norbu is under me and she started playing. So I apologize for any disruption that might have been on my end. So thank you all so much. And I hope everybody online has a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, wherever you are. Take care and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.